Hello, everybody. We are back again on another episode of Upon Further Review, and we're here to discuss why Black Lives Matter and why some things get the outrage and the coverage, whether fairly or otherwise so. First and foremost, the idea of Black Lives Matter as a movement is it's no one group, it's no one who's the leader of it and what have you. It's a social movement that comes about at the hands of the senseless deaths of African Americans at the hands of law enforcement with no repercussions in this country. Black Lives Matter comes about because it does not seem to be apparent to law enforcement that Black lives do. That's why when you see these videos, you disproportionately see African Americans on the ground being knelt on, being murdered and shot, often with no weapon on them, often in nonviolent situations. Calling attention to that is the main goal of the social media hashtag Black Lives Matter. And to take that and scream out all lives matter is as insane as during Breast Cancer Awareness Month screaming about the other cancers that exist.
Yeah, Troy, I think that's really the kind of the crux of the situation. There's so many people that are screaming out all lives matter with this whole total, almost they're anti-Black Lives Matter. You can't really slice it any other way. If someone wants to say, "Yeah, Black Lives Matter," they will, and they retort back, "All lives matter too." You're trying to take something from that movement. There's no way other way to slice it. You don't like that movement, which blows my mind because the movement's purely about ending police brutality against African Americans. I don't understand why that is a controversial issue. That should be something that all Americans are behind. No American should want to see any other particular group being disenfranchised and brutalized by the police. And that is really the crux of the Black Lives Matter movement is bringing awareness and trying to bring change to the real pandemic that's going on that's affecting African Americans from for decades, right? And I think when people scream up and say all lives matter, nobody is debating that all lives matter. No one is debating that one group of people is worth more than another group of people. What we are saying with that is that one group of the all lives matter, right? If you take all lives, black people are part of all lives too. And if one group under that one is under attack more than any other group, it should get the attention. It should get it should have the spotlight put on it so that change can be brought about. It's not discounting anybody else's life. It's not discounting anybody else's problem. But when you have one group of people that is being attacked by the police systematically for decades, and there seems to be no resolution in sight. There seems to be no one that's really caring. There seems to be no meaningful policy change. Then you kind of get to a boiling point of where we're at right now. And it's funny because so many of these people who say that also claim, they're Christian and claim they care about everybody and what have you. And even in the Bible, if you are a Christian and you believe in the Bible, and even if you don't, you can understand this is a good parable that Jesus gives. He says that if there's 100 sheep and goes missing, Jesus will leave the 99 to go after the one sheep, right? He leaves the 99 not because the 99 doesn't matter. He leaves the 99 because the life of that one sheep matters, and the life of that one sheep is in peril. So he goes to retrieve the one sheep to bring it back to the 99 to be part of the whole. And if people can't understand that right now we are the sheep that's in peril, we are the ones that are in danger as African Americans, and that we're the one that needs the spotlight on us to bring some kind of change and bring some kind of help. I don't know what else to say to you. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. They're trying to make Black Lives Matter the movement an issue when it's really it should be a non-issue. The only issue should be the systematic brutality of African Americans at the hands of police.
It's flat out an assault on the idea of Black Lives Matter. When one house is on fire, we send the alarms up and we call for help, and people come and hose down and provide help to that house. No one stands out there and screams, all houses matter, and starts rinsing down houses that are not on fire. The reality is, Black Lives Matter should just be reaffirmed. To counter it with anything else is trying your best to take away from it. And the reality is no, I'm kind of tired of mincing words. It's pure white supremacy. The idea of, Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure of Breast Cancer Awareness, and that's near dear to me. I lost my mother to cancer. My father-in-law actually just passed to cancer. And there's all different types. Neither one was breast cancer. But I'm not going to stand up there while they're wearing pink and scream about all cancers matter. Because you understand that cancer is a problem. You understand the issue and why, because that's the most common form of cancer out there. And the reality is, people don't understand, accept, or acknowledge that this is a problem. That's why they do things like blurt out all lives matter. That even goes all the way down to Colin Kaepernick and the kneeling to bring awareness to police brutality. That was a peaceful protest that lasts about 3 minutes during the singing of the national anthem. And you don't even have to look at them. You don't even have to pay attention. Half the people in the stadium are going to the bathroom or going to get some food or more alcohol. And this man's kneeling, and it has been hijacked to mean something else. And the reality is, the only reason you would do that is to absolutely detract from what the original purpose is, which is to bring awareness to police brutality. Because let's face it, there are a lot of people out there who do not believe this is an issue. They think this is some sort of left wing, right wing political agenda, and they are willfully ignorant to history. The history of the United States is that Black lives do not matter. There have been Supreme Court decisions, like the Dred Scott decision, that the men of African descent, the slaves, I should say, were not men at all, never intended to have the rights and the freedoms of this country. And we have made progress. And we have made progress through protests, through marching, some peaceful, some violent. But we have made progress to become a better nation. The reality is, the idea of Black Lives Matter didn't come from Black people. It is a response to the history of this country. And to look anywhere else is intentional, willful ignorance in the year 2020. To look at a peaceful protest in Colin Kaepernick, and you ask him why he's doing this, and he tells you that he's taking a knee to bring awareness, that he even came up with the idea while consulting with veterans about how to be a little more respectful, because he used to just sit there, not even stand up. But just like when someone gets injured on that field and all the players take a knee and some say a prayer or what have you, no one in their right mind would think that they were being disrespectful to the player that just got hurt. No one in their right mind would think they're rubbing it in, thumbing their nose at the player who just got hurt. No, they're taking a knee to show respect. So taking a knee as a symbol. Now kneeling in itself has become a very powerful symbol. And as people are now protesting, mostly peacefully, there's been some violence, some rioting, looting, and burning, and a lot of provocateurs to take advantage of the situation. Quickly, we change from the idea of police brutality to, oh, the looting, oh, we want to look over here and look over there. But the reality is this, that far too many white Americans want to look the other way and not address the reality that is a history of racism and discrimination. They won't even teach history in schools properly. They want you to look the other way. They don't want to see it. They don't want to be reminded of it. People are having weddings at southern plantations where slaves were raped, murdered, tortured, and forced to work until they die. And if you come to these plantations now where historians are trying to prove a whole new context and explain what went on, People are literally up in arms that they're talking about these ugly things because they just want to look at the beautiful trees. And that's a lot of what we see happening today, Mike. People don't want to look at the man kneeling and think about racism, so they must make it about something else. We don't want to hear the words Black Lives Matter. We must talk about something else. If we talk about police brutality, what about black on black crime, which, by the way, is not a thing? In the 90th percentile, all races kill their own, they kill those who are around them. That's how crime works. We don't use the term white on white crime. There's more white people killing more white people in America. White on white crime. We don't use Asian on Asian crime. We don't say Hispanic crime. We say black on black crime with the express purpose to take away from the idea of police brutality and in the most sinister to insinuate that it's somehow deserved because look at them. They're behaving like animals. They must be treated as such. And that it is time in the year 2020 with this movement and moving on, there's too much information. There's too many people to talk to. There's too many sources of discussion, even forums such as this one, to get the idea, to see that Drew Brees makes these comments, tying the peaceful anti-police brutality protest, talking about the flag, talking about his grandfathers, talking about everything but what the man was kneeling for. That, in my opinion, is pure white supremacy. And I'm tired of mincing words.
It's rough to hear. When I first saw the comments from Drew Brees, I was sitting there thinking, it's like, what in the hell is he doing? In the midst of everything that's going on in this country, and the boiling point of all this racial tension, of it coming to the forefront of police brutality and the disenfranchisement of African American people, he comes out and tries to change the narrative to bring it back to the flag and to the military and to love for the country. No one ever disrespected the flag. No one ever disrespected the country. No one ever, if anything, we want to make the country better. The movement is about making the country better. A rising tide raises all boats. When you make meaningful policy changes and change the way policing is done, that black people don't have to be in fear and afraid of police brutality. Well, guess what? That in itself expands out and helps other races too, because black people aren't the only ones being brutalized by the police, even though we're brutalized more than others. But police brutality is an issue in and of itself, and making meaningful change that helps us helps everybody else. But they rather, cut off their nose to spite their face because they can't stand to sit there and admit that we live in a racist society that prioritizes one group over the other. And when you hear that, you always hear them spin the same narrative. I can't, they spin it to the military and disrespect for the military and disrespect for the flag. When Colin Kaepernick has said it himself, when other people have said it themselves multiple times, has zero to do with the military, disrespect the military, zero to do with the flag. It is a peaceful form of protest. Matter of fact, back in the day, kneeling is one of the most humbling things you could do. When you went before a king or a queen, you would take a knee and show some humility. It's the most peaceful form of protest that man could have done on the national stage to try to get everybody's attention. And you quickly see how people vehemently turn that against him and try to change the narrative and get it off subject, get it off track. Because for reasons beyond my comprehension, they don't want to see equality. They feel the need to say that we are better than you just based off the color of our skin. And that is just asinine. It's totally ridiculous and ludicrous. And it's time now that, like you said, I think we need to stop missing words. We need to start showing these people, like, if you're going to say all that, we know exactly which side of the track you stand on. There should be no debate on whether or not police brutality is an issue and needs to be fixed. There's also should be no debate, because I've heard people try to bring this up, that African Americans we're over exaggerating. We're making a big deal out of nothing. It's only a few times or something like that. It's time to stop with the lies. It's time to stop with the false accusations. It's time to just own up to the fact that the police department, historically, going all the way back to be before Jim Crow, back to when the KKK first started, a lot of these members were in law enforcement. You know, this is a historic thing that has never been addressed. And for some reason, beyond the life of me, no one in politics, no one seems to really want to touch it. No one wants to seem to make meaningful legislative changes to prevent America's own citizens being gunned down and abused and brutalized by the police.
The reality is that there are many that do not wish to think of, look at, or see that history. The history of law enforcement, police as we know it, in the United States of America originates from slave patrols. It originates from the hunting and seeking of their loose, wild property that was not seen as men and is simply property to be culled, to be brought back, to be enslaved. We've made a lot of progress in this country, but one thing we have not done is taught the true history of the United States of America. Because while people want to talk about the flag and World War II, the reality is the military, while fighting for survival, facing a battle for the planet itself against evil, they were segregated and had to basically be forced to do so by the president because of the extraordinary crisis that they faced. Black soldiers were overseas in Europe being blanketed with flyers from the Führer himself asking, why are you fighting for a country that does not respect you? That's a real part of history. Is it talked about enough outside of Black History Month? Because, see, Black History Month has segregated Black history into the shortest month of the year, and Black history is separated from American history, even at the collegiate level and even in high schools. But African American history was a separate class. You can have American history, U.S. history, world history, but African American history is a separated class. The reality is Black history is American history, and we hide the ugly parts, and that is why people today still deny just how bad slavery was, just how heinous some of these men were. Oh, they were just fighting for their state and their way of life. They were fighting for the right in the Confederacy and the Civil War, the right to enslave human beings and treat them as property, to be a superior man. That's what they were fighting for. It was threatened, and they shot first. And in this, when we talk about the flag and troops and soldiers, Black troops, including both of my grandfathers and my grandmother, who worked in the Department of Defense, dealt with outright and egregious racism, state sponsored, coming from the very military, wrapped and draped in that very flag. That is history. When those soldiers came back and they fought and they celebrated, Black soldiers came home in uniform to be spit on, to be beaten, to be moved to the back of the bus, to be treated as lesser than by those who didn't even go and fight, and by plenty who was over there fighting with them. That's the reality. Could have been Drew Brees' grandparents for all we'll know. We'll never know. I'm sure he'll say they were the best. The reality is that is the history of America. And you can't just draw, there's no sharp line where all of that ended. To this very day, highlighting these injustices is treated as hostile because highlighting these injustices reveals the very ugly, dark cracks and stains in the history of America. That's why so many people will seek to fight it. When Martin Luther King, as peaceful as they come, was protesting, they jailed him. They turned hoses on him. They sicked dogs on him. They treated him like shit. And then now, the very descendants of the people who did that to him, they killed him. They go on and they'll invoke his name. And, the reality is there's no protest good enough. Martin Luther King's protests weren't good enough. MLK speaking wasn't good enough. His very words were not good enough. He was despised. He was one of the most hated men in America. The government and the FBI wiretapped him, followed him, hunted him. They did everything they could to discourage him. They sent him letters, told him to kill himself. That is what the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States government did to Martin Luther King Jr. The reality is, it doesn't matter if you say Black Lives Matter, if you kneel, if you speak out against racism, you will be accosted by those who do not wish to look in the mirror in America. And that's the reality. History has shown that. Going all the way back to the abolitionist movement and free Negroes at the time speaking, were looked at with disdain. To people fighting for civil rights, hey, you're not slaves anymore. I mean, what more do you want? You're free. They were always those who wish to turn the issue into something else, to move away from civil unrest, move away from civil disobedience, and escalate it and crush it. And we are seeing it today, now wrapped in all lives matter in that flag.
Harking back, and I just want people to kind of close your eyes and imagine going off to World War II. Now, I know that everybody's seen at least a movie or two and see how violent and how deadly and how gruesome the battlefield was in World War II. Now, imagine you're an African American soldier, and imagine you're going to war, and imagine you're fighting for a country that hates you. You're fighting for a country that doesn't respect you. You're fighting for a country that wants to reduce and eliminate your rights. You're fighting for a country that would rather off have you dead, and you still fight anyway. I don't know a higher form of patriotism than that. So when someone brings up it's disrespectful to the flag, it's disrespectful to America, they clearly don't know patriotism themselves. Because fighting for something that doesn't even want you, but still fighting anyway, and then coming home and being treated like dirt, it's beyond me. It's hard to wrap your head around. And America tends to always whitewash its sins. You know, it always wants to make itself look in the greatest light. Even when we look upon, they talk about, oh, the founding fathers, like they never did any wrong. They owned slaves. They raped their slaves. They killed their slaves. They're murderers, right? America itself, just the land itself was taken from the Native Americans. Murder, rape, torture. That is the true basis of how this country came to be. And no matter which way you want to whitewash it, that's the facts. That's the truth. And instead of owning up to it and saying we made so many grave mistakes, let's try to do right, they try to minimize it. They want to whitewash it. They want to make it seem like it doesn't happen. They want to accuse you and point you out like, why are you living in that wasn't me. That was my, I'm not responsible for my ancestral sins. You're benefiting from your ancestral sins. So you can't say that. You're directly benefiting from what they did. And the responsible and ethical thing is to try to right the wrongs. But that's not something that seems to want to be done. So now we get to where we are today, where things have reached a boiling point, and they wonder, why are people out here in the streets? Why? Okay, they charged the guy, they charged him, they just charged the other officers. Why are they still protesting? They're going to get their justice. No, that's not enough. It's beyond that. It's because even if these four go to jail, and that's a big if when it comes to prosecuting police officers, there is no safeguards or guarantees put in place that this will not happen again. We can't just put a band-aid over this issue. It's not going to solve it. It's going to take real change to prevent these type of incidents from going forward. And it's going to take America to take a look at itself in the mirror and realize the ugly side of things. I think the world is starting to look at. We see protests happening worldwide. We're even getting condemned by Iran on how we're handling the situation. When you're even when other countries where people's liberties are being diminished, they can even point and say, "See, America, you're not so great." Our dirty laundry is being aired on the national world stage, and unfortunately, our leadership from the country is talking about mobilizing the military, trying to dominate, and he's the president of law and order, where he wants to move and mobilize active duty military to quell the people, to squash the people airing of their grievances, to squash their protests, to eliminate their First Amendment rights. This is where we come to today. So at this point, it's almost, where do we go from here? How do we get off of this? Because we once again we're back in this cycle, we're running on the treadmill, and how do we figure out, you know, where we can make some meaningful changes? When will people realize that this issue is not going to go away? America's a powder keg right now, and the wrong series of events can set it off.
It's hard to fight an enemy that you refuse to acknowledge. And I'll take that a step further. It is quite difficult to claim your love and patriotism if you're unwilling to know what something truly is, what the history of this country truly is. Ask yourself, do you know African American history? Do you know what we has happened to not people 100 years ago, to my mother, to my father, to my grandparents, the people that were in my life? Do you understand the state sponsored, the American flag sponsored racism that impacts the lives of people today? This was not, it's in the history books, but it was not 100 years ago. There are many alive, here and breathing. The Civil Rights Act passed in 1964. For people who were born before then, people who went to school before then or during then, and by the way, they did not take it peacefully. They did not take it lying down. Go crack open a Disney movie. Go watch Remember the Titans. It was 1970. Like, this was not a finger snap and we're all good from here now, right, dude? Moment. And to ignore it, to not acknowledge it, to change the subject is pure white supremacy. And if you not would wish to engage in white supremacy, and you do not wish to be labeled or called a racist, why don't you actually listen for a change? When the majority of a people, black people in America, say Black Lives Matter, try just agreeing with them for once.
I challenge anybody who is white to really go turn off the cable news and go do your independent research on African American history, Native American history, and heck, even how America treated Asian population when they first came here. See the injustice that happened, see the ramifications and the ripples of the decisions made back then and how they factor into today. And you'll begin to understand why we say Black Lives Matter. You'll begin to understand the pain. You'll begin to understand the angst and always feeling the feeling that your voice is not heard. You do not matter. You have a lower self worth than your counterparts. Once you finally start to imagine just trying to put yourself in an African American shoes, at that point, maybe you can try to understand why we say Black Lives Matter. Maybe at that point you can understand and really sympathize to why we are so moved by issues like these. And it's really something that I really encourage you to do. You can't. It's one of those things you can't. They don't teach it correct in schools. You have to really just do your own research. It's out there. There's no excuse. There's no excuse with the advent of the internet. There's no excuse not to be able to look and do your own independent research and see why we have gotten to where we are today. And hopefully, with the help of everyone, because this is going to require a change. not just a change in attitude from the policing, but a change in attitude of America itself. And hopefully, as we begin to educate ourselves and talk and listen to each other, we can start finding meaningful ways forward. Because if we want to be America the Great again, if we were ever such a thing, we need to come together. We need to figure out these issues, and we can no longer sweep this under the rug.